Our mission at PsiQuantum is to build and deploy the world's first real, useful quantum computers. And we've made immense progress. And in the coming months, we'll break ground at our first 2 compute sites in Brisbane and in Chicago. And while PsiQuantum is a commercial company, our success will be accelerated with the support of our government partners in the US, the UK, and Australia. And we're grateful for their support at a time when global competition for technological leadership is really at an all-time high.
Do you often have that effect on people?
That's right. That's quite a punchline. Thank you. Usually it's a bass drum. The race for useful quantum computing is, again, the next frontier in this competition with our adversaries, because large-scale fault-tolerant computing is essentially going to change the way we think and transform our world by enabling us to solve currently impossible problems. And what that means for the US and our allies is thinking about ways to use advanced materials to make our aircraft more resistant to corrosion, producing optimized designs for ship hulls, and also thinking about how to generate operational advantage in logistics. So these incredible capabilities to make the impossible possible is why we at PsiQuantum believe that developing the world's first useful quantum computers is a strategic imperative for the US and our allies. And I look forward to hearing the panelists' thoughts on how we might reinvigorate the Phase 2 or the Pillar 2 framework using commercial innovation to create a shared quantum industrial base. And with that, I'll turn it over to our esteemed moderator, Mr. Brian Clark.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate all of you being here today and sticking with it all the way through today here at Sierra Space for one of our final panels. I'm really honored today to have a terrific panel of experts and leaders with us to talk about the state of AUKUS and where we're going for AUKUS. So on my immediate left, the Honorable Kevin Rudd, Ambassador of Australia to the United States. To his left, Dr. Peter Heinem, who is performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Critical Technologies. To his left, Admiral Rob Goucher, who's the commander of U.S. submarine forces. And then to his left, Martin Connell, the British Second Sea Lord, so the second in command of the British Royal Navy. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about AUKUS. So one note for the audience, if you look up on the screen here, the QR code that's up there is what you can use to be able to submit questions that will come to me on this iPad and that I will hopefully translate correctly into questions for our panel. So as we go along here today, please feel free to send questions my way. So to start off with, I thought we could talk a little bit about the state of AUKUS and some of the progress and success stories from Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. So Pillar 1, to refresh everyone's memory, is the submarine-based pillar that's going on an optimal pathway to eventually to increase deployments to the western side of Australia and then eventually provide nuclear submarines to Australia. And then Pillar 2 is the technology-focused pillar. So gentlemen, what do we see as some of the major successes in Pillar 1 and Pillar 2? And then what do we think the main focus areas should be as we go forward from here? So I'll start with you, Ambassador Rudd.
Sure, good. Well, it's good to be with you this afternoon to see that AUKUS generates such a crowd. We are barely a couple of years into the AUKUS project in both of its dimensions. For those of you who are not AUKUS aficionados, it's submarines on the one hand for us, buy and build, and together with our US and British partners. And then on the other hand, probably in the long term in the sweep of history, creating an increasingly seamless market of defense, science, technology, innovation and industry across all three countries, leading with artificial intelligence, through quantum, through EW, for unmanned vehicles, and a number of other categories as well. So this is potentially that latter set of enterprises under the advanced technologies rubric, quite revolutionary across our three systems, and a way of cracking open, frankly, a lot of the way in which we've gone about traditional procurement in our different systems. In terms of progress to date on AUKUS Pillar 1, which is submarines. The Australian Submarine Agency is up and thriving. Secondly, in terms of the training of personnel, we've already had large numbers of officers and seamen through the relevant US training academies. A number of these have in turn been deployed on Virginia-class vessels, and that's within the first year or two of operation. On the workforce trajectory, we've had already 140 Australian workers from relevant industries embedded and trained in various US shipyard facilities, both in Hawaii and elsewhere. Also, by way of progress, we've had our first maintenance of a Virginia-class vessel outside of United States ports, and that was done at HMAS Stirling, just south of Perth. And on the base itself at Stirling, what we now call Surf West, when you go there, take your surfboard, it's all systems go with a very significant upgrade. The total investment in these upgrade projects, including Surf West, where you will see increasingly US Virginia-class vessels attached to the United States Navy, as well as our own in time, operate from. This is a large multi-billion-dollar investment, a massive upgrade. And the adjacent ship building and industrial precinct at Henderson is also undergoing massive expansion as well. These are both just south of Perth on the west coast of Australia. As far as the advanced technologies work, we are also delighted with the level of progress we've achieved so far. It is less than 6 months that we finally got the revised regulations and regulatory environment through Department of Defence and through the Department of State, and the revisions to FMS, ITARs, and the ETL, the Excluded Technology List. And the good news is, under these new arrangements, what we do as Australia with the United States and the UK is now north of 70% FMS, ITARs free. We'll still chip away at the remaining 30%. We're a persistent bunch of bastards in Australia. And so anyone from the DoD or Department of State here, we've only just begun. But frankly, this is a big breakthrough, given where we've been over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. On the Australian side, given that's only 5 months ago, on last count, we have about 275 Australian companies in the supply chain now registered under this new license-free arrangement. And they're already engaged in a whole bunch of transactions. In fact, I ran into someone just downstairs before who'd been through the new arrangement. So this is good news. And on the US side, we now have, I think, just north of 100 firms registered. UK numbers I don't have readily to hand. So, but the key thing with advanced technologies is to turn the legislative framework, the regulatory framework, and frankly, the number of registrations of firms now into real live projects which are unfolding. Some of this is already starting to happen, whether it's in AI systems being deployed to P8s, new algorithms being employed there using systems which are being developed between our two countries. Secondly, with certain unmanned vehicles as well, there's already been activity underway, but there's much more to be done. But if I was giving a report card at barely the 5 or 6 month mark into the new regime, it's all systems go. For Australia, the combined investment in this entire enterprise over 15 years will be something in the order of 250 to 300 billion US. And that is the forward projections through budgets through to the 2030s. So we're ready and roaring to go, and we're looking forward to working with partners from industry to join with us in making 1 and 2 subs and the advanced technologies of the future success stories on all counts.
Excellent. Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Heinem.
Oh, it's building on that. So for Pillar 2 work, we were the submarines of Pillar 1, and then there was Pillar 2 at the beginning. And what we've seen is a tremendous maturation of approach since we've got underway. I'll provide some examples. When we started, there were 6 areas of technical work. We had working groups and lines of effort. So part of that maturation is to move from tech areas and open-ended projects and so on to what we now are moving towards is being entirely project-based, which is structured for delivery of capability. less about the technical areas and more about having the services lead operational definition, operational results. So what you'll see from the outside and as we see coming from the inside is that the prioritization of work that we do, who we pick to do it and so on, is going to be really changing fast. We have technical achievements, and the ambassador listed some of those. We have a number more in AI, and we have multiple in subsea warfare, and both in terms of vehicles and in terms of sensing and so on. And from someone who's part of Pillar 2, helping to make these things work, I can call them environmental changes. One was the ITAR and export control list. Second, there's a very much a deepened cooperation and interoperability of systems between the three countries. And this is part of that meshing together, both in the literal technical sense, as well as in the cooperation, design, and construction senses. The poster child for that in our work is something we've been calling the Maritime Big Play, which in 2024, we teamed up with Autonomous Warrior, an Australian exercise. They hosted us to combine a lot of different types of equipment, which I may talk about a bit later, and do tremendous show and tell with over 1,000 people cooperating. Again, from the inside, we've now had funding in the US system for 2 years in a row. Some in 24 and more in this just arrived or arriving now in 25. And that gives us that flexibility. These are not the big funds. These are not the major service-driven projects. These are the ability to do the studies. Is there a pony in this one? How do you do reality checks? How do we do the red teaming? How do you do the V&V, validation and verification of these things? All absolutely critical. Also in the US system, the partnerships with Defense Innovation Unit, Strategic Capabilities Office, multiple Navy units, and others. These are really maturing, as well as with the international partners. Industry, Pillar 2 doesn't work. It is all about industry with some government help and mediation. So we now have the armaments directors involved in this as well. The International Joint Requirements Operations Council, the IJROC, is also in the mix, validating defense requirements, looking towards projects. And we're putting out things like innovation challenges. DIU and our system, well, 3 systems put out one, electronic warfare, last year. There's one out now on maritime subsea or maritime operations. That went live, I think, last week or so. And then, in terms of one of those glue factors just for making things work, we now have a collaborative IT environment going into place between the 3 countries, led by the CIOs of the 3 defense departments. So all these things, that was maturation of approach, technical achievements, and these quote, unquote, environmental changes are all helping us now to accelerate and gel what started 2.5 years ago. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah, so I'll repeat a few of the things that we've already talked about, but I think up front, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are on plan. So we're where we want to be. Now, in fairness, some of the heavy lifting and hard stuff is ahead of us, but we certainly are where we want to be today with both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. If I go to Pillar 1, I'll talk about the port visits and operations down at where we'll station Submarine Response Force West. So we've done 4 port visits since we announced the optimal pathway. We did our first submarine tended maintenance period with USS Hawaii last year. So our tender went down to Australia. We had Australian workers on the tender, and we maintained USS Hawaii during her port visit. And then this year, we're going to actually do a submarine maintenance period. So now we'll do it out of Stirling, Australia, with the Australian workforce on a U.S. submarine as we get through the sets and reps to being able to have a credible maintenance capability down at SRF West. We also just named Jason Pittman, the former Commodore Submarine Squadron 6, to be the first Commodore of Squadron 3 in Stirling, Australia. The operational workforce is on plan. So today there are 6 officers and 14 enlisted sailors serving on 4 different U.S. Virginia-class submarines, and we're going to add 2 more in the next month or so, and that includes 2 in Guam on USS Minnesota, and then USS Missouri in Hawaii, and then eventually we will have some Australian officers and sailors serving in Groton, just because as the throughput comes, we're going to want to be able to spread it out throughout the force. And we'll use that to backstop any manning gaps that we have in our force. So it just gives us a little bit more resiliency along the way. Right now, there's about 100 sailors in the training program. That's about 80 enlisted and 20 officers, and the enlisted are half nuke and half forward ratings. And we awarded the first gold dolphins in December. So Admiral Kavanaugh, who will relieve as the sub-pact commander, presented those dolphins in Yokosuka back in December. And we obviously we expect to have many more over the next few years. And our SRF West maintenance trainees are on plan. So we needed 129 in 2024, and we've got 155. So again, on plan. And so these are civilian workers who will basically serve as our maintenance workforce at Submarine Response Force West. As for Pillar 2, we touched already on artificial intelligence. So we really, the P8 community and our sonobuoy systems is where we've been working hard, and we've put together a US algorithm, a UK algorithm, an Australian algorithm, and then a combined algorithm. And as you would expect, the combined algorithm outperformed the other individual algorithms. And we have the first ever classified collaborative development environment. So this is where we can load petabytes of data in order to train those artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. And we recently tested it. I have not gotten the results yet. I've got a verbal that it went well, but we tested it in Exercise Black Widow just a few weeks ago in Hawaii with those algorithms on sonobuoys. Subsea and seabed warfare is another big area we've been working. I'm really pleased with something we did in the Atlantic. I got a phone call from Dorothy Engelhart, who works on the Secretariat, and said, hey, we have some extra ship time. Do you want it? So yes, that'd be great. She said, okay, but you got to use it in 90 days. And you have to use it by the end of the year. It was like September, and you got to tell them 90 days in advance. So it's like, okay, we'll take the second week of December and we'll figure it out. And we got together with our Australian partners and our UK partners, and we put together Integrated Battle Problem 25.1, which tested both offensive and defensive subsea and seabed warfare. So we rapidly put together teams from all 3 countries. We built some goals, and we went and operated unmanned underwater vehicles and remotely operated vehicles off the back of a commercial ship that had already been paid for, and it just had 2 weeks of extra time by the end of the year, so we were able to rapidly put that to use. And then we're already planning for Exercise Talisman Sabre, which will be executed off the coast of Australia in July 2025, where we'll continue to develop the reps and sets for subsea and seabed warfare. On unmanned underwater vehicle, torpedo tube, launch and recovery, great partnership with the UK. And we have 2 systems that we're testing. We have the Yellow Moray system, which uses a Huntington Ingalls Remus 600 vehicle. And then we have the Rat Trap system, which uses an L3 Ivor 4. And we're partnered with the UK operating those systems. We've tested them on our both Los Angeles and Virginia class submarines. We currently have Delaware deployed with the Yellow Moray system. And the Astute class over the last 5 or 6 months has tested the UK version or variant of those systems as well, and we're sharing all the lessons learned and working together on those capabilities. And both US, UK are at the hip on making sure that we push forward with our torpedo tube launch and recovery capability for unmanned underwater vehicles. And then finally, the lightweight torpedo, the UK Stingray torpedo is going to get tested later this year on a US P8. So some of the successes in Pillar 2 over the last year.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. Admiral Connell.
Let me just fill in a couple of gaps. And it's great that just a couple of years in, we're completing each other's sentences. So Rob's given a great summary there of some of the things we've been doing together. But look, I think it's just worth stressing that all 3 nations are different levels of maturity on AUKUS. I see AUKUS through the lens of building on the 1958 Mutual Defense Agreement. So we've got the best part of 6 decades of being custodians of nuclear technology, and it's both strategic and seamless the way in which, until a couple of years ago, the UK and US have been operating, developing capability, sharing lessons, and feeding that into our respective industrial bases. I think also the other thing to note is we're always going to shift the emphasis depending on what phase we're in AUKUS. And we're in the early phase of this right now. And that will shift as Australia builds its own level of indigenous capability, both in the industrial base and its Navy, and then as it operates Virginias, and then as it operates SS and AUKUS in the future. So we've got to be sensible about what's the priority for this period set against what we might be doing in a few years' time. A lot of the work that's been done in the last couple of years is that essential foundational work. Now, it might not appear too sexy, but it's really important for programs such as this. And let me just break that down briefly. First of all, the governance. So from a UK perspective, and some of you might have seen, it was announced yesterday by the British Prime Minister, we're now standing up a special advisor for AUKUS. The British government's done a review of AUKUS, where we're at, progress to date, and what needs to be done in the years ahead. And it was felt that we need to lift the visibility of AUKUS across the UK government. It doesn't naturally sit in one government department. Defence clearly has a strong amount of equity in that, but the Cabinet Office, Department of Energy, Business, Education, all of these different government departments have input to AUKUS. So Stephen Lovegrove was the National Security Advisor in the UK when the announcement was made a few years ago. He has been appointed into that role, and I know in the weeks ahead he'll be once again traveling back to Washington and Canberra to speak to colleagues about how we can lift this even more as three nations. And then we also set up a joint program office here in the US, populated by experts from all three nations. We've populated and thickened expertise in the UK. I've put additional people into Australia as well. And I was delighted last year to be stood alongside the Chief of the Australian Navy and others as we graduated the first 3 Royal Australian Navy officers from our own nuclear program. So as Rob said, we've got Australian sailors going through the UK schools and the US schools. And I'm delighted that they've since been working in Astute-class attack submarines. They're now qualified to stand their own nuclear engineering watch and are doing so in our submarines at sea. So I agree with the other panel members. There's been a lot of activity that's taken place, some of it out of sight. It doesn't grab all the headlines. And then very briefly on Pillar 2, there is a complementarity, as was mentioned, between some elements of Pillar 2 and Pillar 1. So the UK leads on some of the underwater domain work. I think the smartness there is, first of all, seeing what is complementary, what can we do now, both with Astute-class, with Virginia-class, and we're doing that very openly. But also, we're much more aware that our own critical undersea infrastructure is being threatened. So this is not something we can hang around and wait for. We've got to get on with this now. And we're sharing those lessons between three nations, as well as exercising, testing new technologies, new capabilities, as was mentioned. We're also now getting the science and technology folk in the same room as the capability folk to look at the problems we're facing today and seeing how we can use the expertise across three nations to get after it quicker.
Thanks, Admiral Connolly. I mean, we'll come back to that question of subsea and seabed warfare in a second, though, because that's really an interesting point that you and Admiral Goucher both made. Let's step back, though, and see if we can make some news here. Ambassador Rudd, so one of the...
I'm not in the news making.
So obviously the investment in Pillar 1's submarines is a sizable capital expenditure on the part of the Australian government. The concern is sometimes expressed that this is a big amount of money. What's the benefit? What's the return on that investment? We've had this recent deployment of PLA ships off the coast of Australia. I'm sure more will follow. Does that help to clarify what the rationale is for why Australia needs nuclear submarines, or how do you make the case for that investment as we go into an election season and then future election seasons?
In terms of the rationale for the entire AUKUS project from an Australian perspective, this is clear-cut in the mind of the political leadership of the country on both sides of the aisle. It's quite remarkable to have such an at-scale defence project as this, certainly in Australia's post-war military history, to have complete bipartisan buy-in. And that's because there is a bipartisan buy-in to this proposition. That is, our strategic circumstances in the Indo-Pacific have radically changed. Point one. Point two, there are capability sets which we require sovereignly in the case of Australia and conjointly with our allies in the United States in the Indo-Pac, which we will enhance our combined capabilities by adding this to the Australian Defence Kit. And thirdly, last time I looked at the map, Australia has a significant maritime environment. It's one of the largest exclusive economic zones in the world. We border 3 oceans, the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, everyone forgets about the Southern Ocean, including our penguins on Heard and Macquarie Island. Not everyone's forgotten them. And as a consequence, for us to be serious about our future, these capabilities, frankly, are inevitable in the coming. Vis-a-vis how they are viewed from Beijing, I would simply make this point. I'm a lifelong student of China, okay? I began studying China, nearly 50 years ago as a junior woodchuck before I entered the Australian Foreign Service. And as what I call a Beijing-ometer at work, the louder the noise of China's complaint about a given project, usually it's a reasonable indicator that this project is of some substantial strategic merit. When I look at the volume of noise which has been articulated from Beijing about 2 things in the last 2 or 3 years, one is AUKUS and the second is the Quad, occupying the biggest lump of real estate in Chinese propaganda and media, then to me that suggests that China is sensitive about the capabilities and frankly the collaborative arrangements which are beginning to emerge. I would think that from the view of the Australian body politic, all sides of the body politic, centre-left, centre-right parties, is that this is further attestation of the wisdom which underpinned the original decision to enter this project. And as the Admiral and others have pointed out, we are on track in the implementation stakes. It's a hard road, it's a difficult road. There are many challenges which lie ahead of us. We are completely pragmatic about that. But 2 years and a bit into this project, it is on timetable, and we are pleased about that.
Excellent. Good point about China's propaganda. So Congressman Joe Courtney has joined us from Connecticut's 2nd Congressional District. So thank you for being here, sir. And since you're here, I'll pose the next question to you. So we've heard a lot of concerns about the ability of the U.S. submarine industrial base to support both U.S. demand as well as these new submarines for Australia down the road. It seems like, though, we've kind of turned a corner. So have we made progress in terms of ramping up submarine production to support both AUKUS and the U.S.?
Sure. So, thank you for putting up with my late arrival here. Unfortunately, there's some things in the House these days we can't really control, like the schedule, among others. But first of all, just one point about Kevin's answer there. When I try to explain AUKUS to people, both whether it's back home or my colleagues in the House, I think, sometimes the most powerful sort of moment for people is to remind them that the population of Australia is roughly about the state of Texas. Yeah. And to have political consensus to take on something as just enormous as AUKUS, is, I think that really gets people's attention. And certainly, Kevin knows the political landscape far better than any of us here, and particularly me, but it's clear every time I talk to counterparts in the Parliament, it is quite striking, just the consensus, that exists to take on something which, again, it's hard to imagine, like, getting that through the budget of Austin, Texas, or, Sacramento or whatever, which are comparable populations. I mean, it's really, just a testament to the power of the program that's there. So on Saturday, Admiral Goucher was there. The 24th Virginia was commissioned into the fleet. That actually is the tipping point now. There are more Virginia-class submarines in the Navy than Los Angeles-class submarines. And again, if you look at the schedule, really over the next year or so, Massachusetts is slated for the fall to be commissioned in Idaho, and in December. Next year, Arkansas and Utah. Again, they're all late. I mean, I think, again, there's people in this audience who understand that. But the fact that you're starting to see, just the cadence you pick up speed, shows that, in my opinion, the lateness, which was definitely caused, certainly to some degree by the pandemic, is really starting to happen. Our hiring, certainly in New England, is historic. It's higher than during the peak of World War II, 5,000 in 2023, 4,000 last year. It's going to be roughly about 3,000 this year. That's not a sign of diminishment. It's actually because the retention, I think, has surpassed what I think the planners initially thought. So with the workload that's coming through, plus the retention, that's why it's sort of fluttered down a little bit. But again, if you keep looking further out in terms of just the projection of tonnage that's going to come through there in platforms, it's going to go back up again. And I do think we've really found some really effective, fast job training mechanisms. We're reaching younger in terms of the secondary high schools, not just tech schools, but also the comprehensive regular high schools to install welding labs, machinist programs. And so, and I was at a ribbon cutting last week where they're now going to start with the Navy's assistance, the Anchor program, which is actually going to go down to as low as 5th grade school students to, again, start really getting the whole awareness of the fact that, the whole maritime realm, whether it's serving in the Navy or working, in the industrial base, is really something that people should now really start factoring into their future.
And with AI eliminating a lot of white-collar jobs, shipyard jobs are going to be good jobs.
Absolutely.
In the future.
Yeah, no, it's not your father or grandfather's shipyard by any stretch.
Right. So, Admiral Goucher, one thing I wanted to kind of pose to you, and both you and Admiral Connell, is we've talked about the optimal path, and eventually results in Australia buying U.S. submarines in 2032, approximately. But clearly there's a lot of progress being made between now and then that's going to improve the deterrence that's provided by the alliance in Australia via the Undersea. So can you both talk a little bit about kind of how you view that SRF posture and how it could be employed as part of an alliance effort to deter aggression and help address things like threats to undersea infrastructure?
Sure. I think, at its core, we now have another port that is purpose designed to support the Virginia-class submarine. And so having that opportunity to have 2 or 3 or more submarines forward deployed, and having the ability to better sustain the rotational submarines that are operating in the Western Pacific are just, they're obvious advantages that really come to bear for us. And as you pointed out, or actually as Ambassador Rudd pointed out, it clearly has China's attention. So if you see China as the threat, which I think we all clearly do, we already know it's doing its job even before we have them there. So having them there will only add to that. And I certainly think, too, I just did the Maritime Industrial Base panel, and I talked about the need to understand the condition of the submarines before they go into depot maintenance. Well, now I have another location where I can go do that discovery work and know that I have the capacity, if I find a problem, I can fix it right there. So there's just all these second, third order opportunities that it brings to us. And I'd like to also say it puts the Indo and Indo-Pacific, because it is another access route for us. If we need to go and operate against China, that gives that port access as well.
Right, a great point. And for the UK, I assume going east of Suez with a astute submarine, it's really beneficial to have that kind of maintenance capacity that far forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be really clear. I'd love to have the number of submarines Rob's got, right? I haven't. We've got, our 6th Astute class submarine will be rolling out of Barrow in just a few months. And you won't be surprised to know that the highest demand for their operational use is in the North Atlantic. I don't see that changing anytime soon. So we've got to be really careful about how we apply and proportion our forces in the right theater, working with allies, certainly in the Euro-Atlantic area. But our plan is to commit to the Surf-West commitments we made a few years back. So in a few years' time, we will have 1 Astute boat operating out of HMS Sterling. And I was there a few months ago. I think they're making great progress. And as Rob said, it's going to be fantastic to have a base there that's well-founded, supported, protected, where we've got the combination of all our 3 nations, engineers and operators there. Now, we're not going to wait until we get to a few years' time. I've got, as I say, people on the ground there today. They're working with our American and Australian colleagues just to see how we're going to do maintenance. And for those people familiar with it, when you deploy a nuclear submarine, doing maintenance at reach is a sport only a few nations can do. And you don't do it in some cavalier manner. You've got to think very carefully about how you do that maintenance. Now, when the Ukraine conflict started a few years ago, we deployed an SSN almost immediately. And in response to one of your earlier questions, all of our wargaming, all of our global force testing in the UK, and much of which we do with US and Australian colleagues, shows that decades from now, stealth and precision lethality are going to count. So we planned that in decades ahead. When we deployed HMS Audacious into the Mediterranean, we didn't know how long it would be deployed. It was deployed for about a year. Now, we had the opportunity to do maintenance in Gibraltar. If we operate in the Indo-Pacific, you've got the ability to do that maintenance in another well-found base.
Right, for those extra long deployments. And the Indian Ocean, to your point, Rob, also is going to become a much more important body of water going forward as China probably tries to press its case for influence there as well. So Dr. Hynum, you talked earlier about this idea of project-based model for the Pillar 2 of AUKUS. And I wanted to get a sense from you, what are some of the priorities that the AUKUS Pillar 2 team is trying to establish? Because I think for a while, the investments have been somewhat spread out, or seem to be spread out. It seems like what you're trying to do is maybe consolidate under a smaller number of projects that are now going to be pushed forward as we try to complement what's going on in Pillar 1.
There's two types of change going on. The first was moving again from these 6 areas of work from the original Pillar 2 startup with like-minded technical people in the 3 countries working on those projects. Generally open-ended. The Navy's projects tended to be much more focused and delivered. We mentioned already the Orions and the acoustic work. So what we've done is to say, because in a way, from an R&D guy's perspective, it's very unsatisfying because when you start something, you need to know what problem you're solving. Right. How's it done today or not done? What's different? Why should we make an attack, a trilateral attack on this one at this time, given everything else we could put money into and resources? If you succeed, who cares? Which is the operational user. And then 5, how do you test? How much is it going to cost? How do you know a year in or 6 months in or 2 years in that you're still on track to deliver? For anybody here who's worked with DARPA, you'll recognize these as the Hallmeyer questions, right. Which if you have a DARPA alumni, you have them tattooed on your body somewhere. But that was the moving to projects. And that's going on, and everyone's on board to do that. And it makes it easy to define what a project could be. Right. And then when you put it in for approval by the AUKUS Pillar 2 process, the trilateral process, the criteria are clear. And that's a great way of doing business. Now, it's that Hallmeyer 4, the if you see who cares. So it's going from, we don't do pure R&D projects just to see if it can be done. We do things in Pillar 2 because we can see an operational capability and we want to take it through from can we do it, how well can we do it, and what does it take to get it over the transom and into play. Again, the Navy team is way ahead on these things. There's 2 prize challenges, one completed last year on electronic warfare. There's one just got underway this year and focused on autonomy and the ocean maritime operations. Those are going straight to industry to look for solutions for known problems. So that's an immediate thing. The projects coming forward, the ones that are being now circulated by the services in the 3 countries are much more ambitious. And it's really inspiring to see some of these coming through. I don't get to talk about them today, sorry. But that's for me, that's been the goal, maturing the Pillar 2 apparatus, which I mentioned before, and the way we think about it, and then moving to scale,
Right.
And scale with operations.
So to build on that, Ambassador Rudd, it seems like when you talk about getting to scale, are we driving toward trying to create basically a shared industrial base, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, essentially, where we've got suppliers from all three countries able to sell into the other countries? Because I think the perception in a lot of cases here in the US is, oh, this is US technology and UK technology going into Australia. But when I look at Australian companies, there's clearly a lot of technology going the other way. So is this intended to get to like a shared industrial base rather than individual industrial bases that interact episodically with one another?
I think the common vision of the AUKUS founders is precisely that in relation to advanced technologies. That is, we all have something to contribute. The United States, those of us who are familiar with this country know it well, love it well. I've lived here for nearly 10 years. This is a vast complex of capabilities across the entire spectrum of what will be needed for the future of warfare. British have huge traditions and huge capabilities across multiple domains. We have significant capabilities which are becoming stronger and stronger as we look at our own requirements for resilience in the future. The truth is, when, for example, you do a single industry challenge, as you've just indicated before, what is really interesting is to see what then is pulled out of the woodwork from the firms participating across the ecosystem. And whereas we can't drill down in a public forum into project by project activity because it becomes sensitive quite quickly, what is for me quite inspiring is just to see what then emerges from these several hundred companies in the Australian defence industrial base, and frankly how quickly they are moving to adjust and to adapt to the new opportunities. I was at the Space Symposium yesterday and the day before in Colorado Springs. There are 25, 35, 45 Australian space companies working on one set of capabilities or another into the US system, into the defence-related sector, also with Space Command. This is happening right across the ecosystem. But why are we doing it? That's the strategic question, is that we've collectively discovered that we need to get innovation from the laboratory into the hands of the warfighter rapidly in a manner which we've not achieved so far. And therefore, because when we look at our adversaries, they're doing this much more quickly than we are. Therefore, a way of doing that is, frankly, combine our talents, combine the opportunities, remove or at least radically reduce the regulatory impediments around making this happen, which is what we've been head down, tail up doing for the last 2 years with our friends in the Congress, led by Joe Courtney, who's been an enormous supporter of this entire enterprise from the get-go, to make it happen. So that's the vision. The test will be, frankly, first and foremost, through the Advanced Technologies Network, because it comes, if we're in the here and now, as opposed to delivery of the first submarines, which comes in 5-7 years' time. But frankly, I'm optimistic about what I already see with the take-up of industries across the spectrum.
So Congressman Courtney, you talked about, Ambassador Rudd talked a little bit about how 70% of the trade or the regulatory impediments have been removed in terms of the AUKUS partners. How do we get after that last 30% to make this almost more of a seamless industrial base between the three countries? And kind of what do you see as some of the bigger opportunities to free that up?
So, if we look back at 2023, when the AUKUS authorities were enacted, the defense export controls, which was the real boulder that we had to move, the appetite in Congress to move even bigger and faster than what the final bill was actually was really very strong and very bipartisan. And so, I think there still is an appetite, over at the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, HASC, and this year's NDAA, which again, we've got very strong leadership in the House and in the Senate, is really aiming at acquisition reform as sort of the real sort of hallmark of this year's bill. But in the briefings that we've been having from industry in terms of just, how can we move faster and more effectively, the question of maybe revisiting the defense export control piece has definitely come up. And I would say, really there's just been, it's like pushing on an open door in terms of members of Congress. I mean, the challenge has always been, and I've been on the committee long enough to remember when Bob Gates was Secretary of Defense and tried to reform defense
Right.
ITAR and just ran, and he was probably one of the most talented public servants of the recent era, and he sort of left frustrated in terms of that task. I mean, I do think AUKUS in a way has just really turbocharged the effort to understand that we've got to get these impediments out of the way, and the State Department, as resistant as they have been historically, and even somewhat in the contemporary moment, again, I think that their sort of posture compared to what it was like during the Gates era is just totally different, and that's very encouraging.
Right. Do you think, since we're on this topic, do you think the trade, back and forth right now that the administration has started, do you think this will impact the ability of AUKUS to proceed, or do you think this will be a passing background
It
noise?
should be a passing. It should be like undertow at the beach where it goes away briefly and we get back to riding the waves. So, but no, there's no question. I mean, that's definitely a countervailing school of thought. And look, at this thing changes by the minute, in terms of this issue that's there. I, personally feel that, what is happening in real time back home on Main Street, not just on Wall Street, I think is going to force, this issue to look a lot different, even in 6 months' time.
Right, that makes sense. So, Amra Goucher, when it comes to some of the technologies for Pillar 2 and how they might relate back to Pillar 1, you're doing a lot of work in terms of the complementarity between submarines and seabed warfare, subsea warfare, and UUVs. Do you see those uncrewed system or those technology investments as a way to expand the reach and persistence of submarines, as well as improve their survivability, ability to get into places where folks are starting to improve their ASW capabilities against them?
Okay, well, Brian, you obviously paid attention at my Hudson Institute panel. So, yes, absolutely. I mean, and I think, really even beyond AUKUS, I think almost every ally we have is very interested and brings something to the table in subsea and seabed warfare, because everybody understands the importance of defending critical undersea infrastructure. And so I think with the UK and Australia, we're probably operating at a little bit higher level, and we can do a few different things. But yeah, that is absolutely a great area. The UK has their own subsea and seabed warfare ship, so purpose-built, dedicated to that mission. And the Australians have done some incredible work with the Ghost Shark extra-large unmanned underwater vehicle, where in really about 2 years' time, they have a product out there that they're testing right now in missions that support subsea and seabed warfare. And so, whereas we have, decades of experience in submarine operations and acoustics and, nuclear power technology and everything, and obviously the UK does, just not to the scale, all of our allies and partners are really on fairly level footing with us when it comes to some of the uncrewed systems and certainly subsea and seabed warfare as a mission. I like to think we are still a bit ahead, but there's just not as big of a delta. And so that has just been a great partnering opportunity across the board.
And so, Admiral Connell, for the UK, obviously there's a lot of concern about undersea infrastructure in Europe and how it's under attack from Chinese, Russian, civilian forces. How about also the ability of undersea forces to be able to deploy their own infrastructure to support sensing operations, or is that part of the mix too? It's not just a matter of protecting, but it's also being able to put your own systems out there to be able to get an advantage in the sensing and sense-making competition?
Right. As Rob said, in the last few years, I think we've become more alert to the threats that are out there. And also, we've realized our increasing dependency on undersea infrastructure. And there are vulnerabilities there. And I think in the past, we were watching that, reporting that up as a Navy, and it wasn't gaining much traction. It is now. And it's gaining traction in terms of the investment that we're enjoying, both in terms of fixed platforms, but also autonomous capabilities that we'll deploy from those platforms. We can't afford to have disruptions to our energy, to our data, to our way of life. And we've seen those disruptions around Northern Europe in the last couple of years. So that's very much an imperative for us to act on that now. I think there is an overlap here to what we're doing in AUKUS. It's not instead of, it's complementary. And then that ability to deploy autonomous expertise means we can be expeditionary about it as well. And then the opportunity is profound, frankly. Once we are more adept at using this, once we have more capabilities, then there's nothing to say we couldn't hold anyone else's capabilities at risk should we choose to.
Right. I'm glad you got to that. So, Peter, one question that came in from the audience, I'm using this to get audience questions in here too, but quantum technology, PsiQuantum actually gave us an introduction here, but how is quantum being rolled in, and are some of the projects you're looking at in the project-based model for Pillar 2, are they incorporating quantum technology?
Sure. So quantum in general, you can divide into three classes: sensing and time, communications, and then compute. On communications, there's ways to use very sensitive receivers, bang back to sensing and time, so that's possible. And what we're doing in Pillar 2 at the moment, we're looking at the ability of clocks and sensors, but clocks mostly, to be ruggedized. We know we can get the technical performance in terms of stability. It's can we get down to the cost, size, weight, and power for use in tactical settings, because that gives us all kinds of advantages for navigation, anti-jam, many different areas. And there's a very active joint project at the moment that's about to go into a bake-off, and we'll see how that one goes. Now, in terms of, there is no, in Pillar 2 at the moment, there is no active compute activity. Very absolutely tracking PsiQuantum and the other companies in this area and the amazing advances that are being talked about.
Thanks, Doctor. So, Ambassador Rudd, we've talked a lot about the shared industry base and technology. How has AUKUS been thus far for Australian companies and business as a revenue generator or a job generator? I mean, I assume companies are involved in the maintenance activity at Stirling. Has this begun to really make an impact also on the economics for Australia?
In Australia, the two states in particular where the activity is concentrated, the states of Western Australia and South Australia, both state governments, Australia's a federation like the United States, and state governments are as powerful in our country as they are in this country. And so they are locked on, which is good to see. And again, it's a bipartisan proposition at the level of state governments as well. So what I see in terms of workforce development and workforce planning and recruitment is that both of these states are gearing up. Perth and Adelaide are significant cities. Adelaide will be the location for Osborne, which is where the AUKUS class SSNs will be built in the second part of the overall AUKUS revolution in Australian submarine technology and building. And so this will transform very much the economy of that part of Australia as it becomes a bigger and bigger defence precinct across the board. These are very large investments. When I look at what will happen at Osborne itself, you're into the tens of billions of dollars over time. Then you go to what is already the significant industrial precinct at Henderson, just south of Perth in Western Australia. It too will be transformed, partly because of the maintenance requirements of US vessels, partly because of the support requirements for our own vessels. So on jobs, employment and industry, you can see the trajectory for the take-up. On the immediate data, I just saw recently some numbers which suggest that across the 270 going on 300 Australian firms registered under the new license-free arrangements under AUKUS, there have already been hundreds of transactions in the case of the last 6 months. So therefore, the take-up in terms of using this environment to advance projects and to generate dollars is happening already. But it's early days. It requires industry and now, frankly, to crowd in together with finance to make the best of these opportunities, both in the UK and in Australia and in the United States.
So one thing that has come up in a couple of the questions here is the investments in technologies outside of undersea and submarines that are part of AUKUS, so long-range fires and hypersonic weapons. Dr. Heinum, are we making progress in those areas as well? It seems like that's a very opportune area for giving Australia the ability to maybe project power or at least defend itself at longer distances.
Sure, absolutely. In November or December of last year, we signed the what was the High Flight Project Arrangement, the trilateral arrangement under AUKUS. And that commits on the order of, I think, $250 million in aggregate to test and evaluation and for the sharing of basic technologies related to hypersonic weapons. So that's an example of the expertise, the resources of the three countries being brought together to really make some significant advances.
Right. So, Congressman Courtney, a lot of the, there's companies that are involved in this from the U.S. side that are trying to bring technologies into the AUKUS, Pillar 2 family, as well as Pillar 1. Do you see this as an opportunity for U.S. companies to get into a larger industrial ecosystem because now you could supply multiple countries' defense needs because we've cleared out these export controls? Is that seen as an opportunity, and are companies trying to take advantage of that, at least in your neck of the woods?
Sure. I still think there's still some mystery for a lot of U.S. companies about Pillar 2 and AUKUS, which I think we've got work to do in terms of just making that sort of awareness level even higher. One sector, though, which I do think is really starting to get active is higher education institutions. University of Adelaide and University of Connecticut and Rhode Island now are starting a collaboration that's AUKUS related. I was speaking to the president of Yale University about the quantum computing work that's being done with Pillar 2, which they've got great programs there, and now they are expressing a lot of interest in that. So I do think and that spills over obviously into private businesses. One point I just want to follow up with Kevin's comments about industry in Australia. When we had a CODEL in Melbourne in February, Admiral Mead, the head of the submarine program, mentioned that 62 Australian firms had been approved by the Navy to do supply chain work into the Virginia program that's there. So, they're starting to already work with the two shipyards in terms of sharing drawings and, some of the nuts and bolts of making that happen. So, that industrial base unity between the three countries is really happening. And lastly, I just want to, the effort that we had in Congress to knock down some of these barriers, I made it sound pretty easy, but it was a lot harder than it looked. And Ambassador Rudd, he's practically an admiral after this experience. But he really was, just a huge reason why there is now so much more support and acceptance of this really what was always considered a dead end legislatively in terms of export reform.
Absolutely.
And it's helped by the fact that we launched the first reform attempted of FMS, ITARS, and ETL back when I was Prime Minister in the Mesolithic period. And Bob Gates was Defense Secretary. When I finally got my most recent career demotion into this job, that I said, why have we made zero progress on this? And there was this real turbocharging of activity. So those who, frankly, innovated with the AUKUS conceptual methodology and then were able to marshal it with so many support supporters from the Congress through the system to actually achieve what we've got in 2 years is quite remarkable, because I know how barren the desert was beforehand. It was hard going. Right. Finally, by the way, on workforce, the Australian government has also funded, together with the states, 4,000 to 5,000 new university places for all the quite specialist engineering skills, which will now be required across multiple Australian universities, in particular those in South Australia and West Australia, but more broadly as well.
And Australia's loss is our gain. So, Ambassador, we're very glad that you're here. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask in our remaining few seconds one question about other players in AUKUS. So Admiral Goucher and Admiral Connell, if I could pose to you, have you talked to your counterparts in Japan, Korea, other European navies about the opportunities to maybe do some collaboration in the AUKUS type framework? Do you see that as something we might do in the future? Or are we really kind of focused on the three main allies right now?
So the answer is yes. Certainly, I talked to Admiral Topshee yesterday from Canada about it. I've talked to Norwegian CNO about it. I know Rick Seif has talked to Japan about it. But the reality is we're already doing AUKUS Pillar 2 stuff with many of our allies and partners. And so, we can bend it under AUKUS Pillar 2, but we have bilateral and multilateral agreements just like the UK does and just like Australia does with many of our partner nations, and we're doing these things all the time. Unmanned's a great example. We're going to run a multinational UUV exercise in Portugal this summer. We helped the Portuguese operate their submarine under ice this year for the first time, and we're talking to Canada about how they can do similar things. So, all of these Pillar 2-like things, I think are already in existence. We just haven't necessarily formalized them into their own AUKUS Pillar 2 title or added them to the charter, that sort of thing. At least that's how I see it. I don't know, Martin, if you see
I completely agree. Under Pillar 2, there is opportunity, clearly. And as Admiral Goucher said, we are already, if you're looking at critical undersea infrastructure, it's a shared concern. Mm-hmm. And we're already collaborating, certainly around Northern Europe in that respect. And then we take those findings and bring them into the AUKUS space as well, and vice versa. So that's in the undersea domain, and there's no reason why that can't be done in other areas as well.
Right. It's all about branding. But that's a good place to end it, I think, and we've also run out of time. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your insights today. Congressman Joe Courtney, Admiral Martin Connell, Admiral Rob Goucher, Dr. Pina Haim, and Ambassador Kevin Rudd, thank you very much for your time today, and we appreciate it.